This story is titled, My Wife Threatened Me to Leave If I Didn't Like Her Cheating, so I actually filed for divorce. Next day, my phone blew up with 32 missed calls from her. Hey Reddit, my name is Tyler, and I'm 29 years old. I've been living in Miami with my wife Jessica for the past 5 years, and for the longest time, I thought we had everything figured out. I work as a marketing coordinator, and we've built what I believed was a decent life together. But something has been fundamentally off for weeks now, and tonight, everything came crashing down. I'm standing outside our apartment building right now, and the cold night air is hitting me, though it doesn't bite the way I expected it would. Instead, it just presses in around me, numbing and quiet, kind of like how I've been feeling lately if I'm being completely honest with myself. There was no yelling tonight, no big dramatic door slam, no last glance over my shoulder as I walked away. I simply walked out because she told me to leave, and for the first time in months, I finally dared myself to actually listen to what she was saying. Jessica was standing there in our living room with her bare feet planted firmly on the hardwood floor, arms crossed like she was waiting for applause after delivering some kind of performance. Her voice was low and rehearsed sounding when she said, "If you don't like how I live, Tyler, then maybe you should leave." There wasn't any hesitation in her eyes when she said it. No hint of the softness that used to be there. Not even the shadow of the girl I married 5 years ago. I waited for maybe a beat, hoping she would laugh it off, hoping she would chase those words back into her mouth and take them back. She didn't. Instead, she just turned around, poured herself another glass of red wine, and sat down on the couch like I hadn't meant anything to her at all. Like the last 5 years we'd spent together were just background noise in her life. So I left. I walked down the hall past the framed photo of us at Yellowstone that we'd hung there 2 summers ago, past the planters she'd kept meaning to throw out for months, but never got around to doing. I made my way down to the parking garage where my car sat covered in a thin layer of dust from sitting too long unused. The truth is, she'd been using it more than I had lately. She said hers felt small these days, that everything was feeling too small for her all of a sudden. Our apartment, our daily routine, me, apparently everything in her life had become too confining. The key turned in the ignition like it had been waiting for this exact night, and I drove through the Miami streets until the city lights looked like melted stars scattered across my rearview mirror. I had no destination in mind, just the need for silence and space to think. I ended up parked outside a closed pet store that we used to pass whenever we walked to that old Mexican place a few blocks away. She used to pretend to like their tacos, I realize now. I just sat there in the dark, engine off, trying to process what had just happened. That's when the first call came in from Jessica. Then another call. And another. 12 calls total, all from her over the course of the next few hours. No voicemails, no text messages explaining herself. Just her name lighting up my phone screen again and again, like a lighthouse calling out from a place I wasn't sure I wanted to return to anymore. What got to me wasn't the sheer number of calls she made. It was the fact that she had waited to panic. She didn't chase me down the hall as I was walking out. She didn't call me as I was leaving the building. No, she waited until I was completely gone, like she needed the time to weigh how this would look, like she wanted to see if I would really go through with it, if I was just bluffing about leaving. I wasn't bluffing. I sat in that car with the engine off, my phone buzzing like a dying insect on the passenger seat. I didn't cry, and I didn't scream. I didn't think about our wedding day or the vows we'd made to each other, or even about the hundreds of little "I love you" notes she used to leave in my lunch bag during our first few years together. Instead, I thought about the way she had looked at me earlier that night. Not with hate, not even with anger, but with complete boredom. Like I was an old song on the radio that she used to love, but now skips without even noticing it's playing. That look was worse than any scream could have been, worse than any betrayal I could have caught her in and proven. It was the sound of someone who had already left the relationship a long time ago and just forgot to take their body with them. So yeah, I let all 12 of those calls ring out, one by one. At 4:15 a.m., I finally shut my phone off completely. I had watched it vibrate itself halfway across the passenger seat over the past few hours, lighting up every few minutes like it was gasping for breath. 12 calls from Jessica, and not a single message left behind. Not a single word to say when it actually mattered most. I sat there in the dark with the windows fogged up from my breathing, the taste of burnt coffee from that gas station still coating my mouth. I stared at the blank screen of my phone and started piecing things together in my mind. Not the big, obvious pieces that anyone could have seen, but the little crumbs I'd been ignoring for months. Jessica used to hum in the kitchen every single morning. It didn't matter if she was hungover, exhausted, or running late for work. She'd be there barefoot, half dancing while stirring oatmeal or scrambling eggs, humming some Taylor Swift or Billie Eilish song that had gotten stuck in her head. That stopped happening around November, and I'd barely noticed at the time. I asked her about it once, jokingly. "Why so serious lately? No more morning concerts?" She smiled at me, but it was dry and forced. "I'm just not in the mood to perform for you anymore," she said. I laughed at the time because I thought it was just her having a bad day. But those bad days turned into weeks, and the weeks stretched on without me really paying attention. Suddenly, she was always texting someone when she thought I wasn't looking. She changed her lock screen from a photo of the two of us to some generic shot of a sunset. Her clothes got tighter and more expensive, new stuff that kept showing up in the laundry that I didn't remember her buying. I started finding receipts for restaurants I'd never been to scattered around the house. I confronted her about it once, in the mildest, most polite version of a confrontation I could manage. "Who's Max?" I asked, after I saw the name pop up on her smartwatch while she was washing dishes. She hadn't noticed I was standing behind her. She didn't even blink when I asked. "A guy from the office. Chill, Tyler." "Why is he texting you at 11:30 p.m.?" I pressed. "Because he's a friend, and we're adults," she replied flatly. Then she turned it back on me like she always did. "God, are you really going to do this insecure routine now?" That had become her specialty lately, flipping everything back on me. I'd raise a red flag about something that seemed off, and she'd accuse me of being paranoid. I'd mention that she seemed distant, and she'd ask why I couldn't handle her having a life outside of our relationship. Now, sitting in this dark parking lot at nearly 5 a.m., I realized just how much of a fool I had been. It wasn't that she had stopped loving me. It's that she had stopped pretending she did. At 4:45 a.m., I turned my phone back on. There was finally one message waiting for me. Just one. "Are you seriously being this dramatic? Come back. I don't have time for this tomorrow." Not "I'm sorry." Not "I'm worried about you." Not even "Are you okay?" No, just that she didn't have time for my drama tomorrow. She was treating this like an inconvenience to her schedule rather than the complete breakdown of our marriage. Something inside me snapped when I read those words. Not in a violent way, but it snapped clean and quiet, like when you pull a thread and the whole seam gives way in your hand. I started the car, drove to my brother's place on the east side of town, parked in front of his house, and slept in the back seat. And in that moment, I knew there was no going back to what we had been. I woke up to the sound of birds making that ugly, high-pitched chirping they do at dawn, like they're proud the world is still turning even when yours isn't. My neck was stiff from sleeping in the car, with one leg bent awkwardly against the console and the other curled under the steering wheel. My brother Kevin's porch light was still on. I hadn't told him I was coming. I had just parked there like a ghost, dragging around pieces of a life that didn't fit together anymore. I didn't go inside right away. Instead, I sat there and watched the sunrise bleed over the rooftops, warm light hitting cold truths. When I finally went inside around 6:30 a.m., Kevin didn't ask any questions. He just opened the door, took one look at me, disheveled in my hoodie, bloodshot eyes, hair a complete mess, and stepped aside to let me in. I dropped onto his couch without saying a word. He handed me a cup of coffee, nodded once, and went back to his room. That simple gesture of understanding was enough for me in that moment. Later that morning around 9:30, Jessica texted again. This time, the message was longer. "I don't know what this little stunt is about. If you want to talk like grown-ups, you'll come home and act normal. I'm not chasing you all over town because you decided to catch feelings out of nowhere." There it was. Her specialty. Gaslighting polished and gift-wrapped in faux maturity. She was flipping the entire situation around, making it seem like I had lost my mind. Like she hadn't been the one who dared me to leave in the first place. Like I was the one who had cracked something sacred between us. I didn't respond to her message. 2 hours later, another text came through from Jessica. "So you're just not going to talk to me now? Real mature, Tyler." I was sitting on Kevin's porch at the time with his dog Murphy, a lazy old golden retriever who acted like the world owed him naps and head pats. I watched the message come in and just stared at it without responding. And then something I had almost forgotten happened. I laughed. It wasn't a good laugh, not happy, but it was real and honest. The kind that sneaks out when you suddenly realize how completely done you are with someone's bullshit. Like a pressure valve letting off the last bit of steam before everything goes silent. I decided to call my buddy Nathan. He's a tech guy, paranoid as hell, always talking about privacy and VPNs and encrypted drives. I asked him how to access deleted data from a phone backup. He paused on the other end of the line. "What's going on, Tyler?" he asked, concern creeping into his voice. I told him enough to make the silence on the line turn heavy with understanding. "Send me the backup," he said quietly. "I'll dig into it. Just send it to me." So I did. That night he called me back, his voice unusually quiet and serious. "Tyler, you need to see this for yourself," he said. "I'm texting you screenshots right now." And he did. Messages, photos, audio clips, things Jessica had thought were permanently deleted, stuff that had synced to her iCloud months ago and been forgotten about. There was no Max. His real name was Brandon. There were videos too, short clips of her sitting on the edge of our bed. She wasn't undressed in them, but they were clearly intimate, clearly showing that she wasn't alone. Her voice could be heard in the background, laughing and whispering things she had never said to me, not even during the good years of our relationship. One message in particular stuck with me like a knife between my ribs. "He still thinks I'm just tired from work. Poor guy wouldn't know betrayal if it bit him." I could scream Brandon's name in his face and he'd probably apologize for interrupting. I dropped the phone and let it hit the floor. I didn't pick it up again for hours. Everything I had feared wasn't just true. It was worse than I could have ever imagined. She didn't just lie to me. She enjoyed doing it. She got pleasure from deceiving me. I stayed up the entire night after Nathan sent me those screenshots. I wasn't pacing around or crying. I just sat there on Kevin's living room floor with my back against the wall, staring into the dark while the images burned behind my eyelids every time I blinked. It was one thing to suspect something was wrong, to piece together signs and trace whispers, to feel the temperature drop in a room you used to call home. It's an entirely different thing to see it all laid out in writing, in pixels, in time-stamped confessions made without any hesitation or remorse. She had mocked me. The woman I married, the one who once cried in my arms when her father died, who used to write me little notes in black Sharpie on my coffee mugs, she called me a poor guy. She said I wouldn't notice betrayal if it bit me. She laughed about me to him, about how gullible I was, about how easy it was to manage and manipulate me. There was a photo from our anniversary dinner that made everything even worse. Our 5th anniversary, we had gone to that Italian place downtown that she'd picked out. She wore a blue dress that night and told me I still gave her butterflies after all these years. But 2 hours before that photo was taken, she had been texting Brandon. "Wish I was with you instead. He's droning on about his work again. I swear sometimes I forget he's even there." It's hard to describe what that does to you as a person. It's not rage, and it's not sorrow. It's this hollowing out, like something is scooping you from the inside until there's just skin and a heartbeat left behind. Nothing else. Around 6:30 a.m., I walked outside and sat on the curb with Kevin's dog. The sky was gray, the kind of morning where everything feels washed out and static. My phone buzzed with another message from Jessica. "So now I'm the villain after everything I've done for you." I stared at that text for a long time. She didn't know yet that I knew everything, that I had seen all of her messages and photos and recordings. She was still playing the old game, push, pull, guilt, bait, confuse, but I was completely done playing along. So I called her. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice was flat, tired, and annoyed. "Took you long enough," she said. "I saw the messages," I said quietly. All of them. Brandon, the videos, the recordings. I saw everything. There was dead silence on the other end for a moment. Then I heard soft laughter, cold and slow. "Wow," she said. "You really went through my phone backups. That's desperate, Tyler, even for you." She wasn't shocked by my discovery, wasn't scrambling to explain herself or make excuses. There were no apologies, no panic in her voice. Just pure contempt. "You lied to me," I said, my voice shaking. "You slept in our bed with another man. You mocked me, you—" "Oh, please," she cut me off sharply. "Don't act like you were some perfect husband. You made it easy. You checked out years ago." I checked out? I was shaking now, anger and disbelief coursing through me. "I cooked for you. I cleaned the house. I asked you what was wrong every night for months, and you said nothing was wrong. You lied to my face." "You bored me," she snapped back without hesitation. "You always played it safe. You always made me feel small with your routine, your quiet, your predictability. I needed more than that. I needed something real." I didn't even realize I was crying until I tasted salt on my lips. Not sobbing, just quiet tears I hadn't asked for. "You could have told me," I whispered. "You could have said something, could have left, walked away. You didn't have to—" Don't flatter yourself, she interrupted coldly. You were never hard to lie to. Then she hung up. And that was the first moment I truly hated her. Not for what she had done, but for how much fun she'd had doing it. The silence after she hung up wasn't empty. It rang loud like the world had cracked open, and now I could hear everything that had been wrong for far too long. I sat there with the dog for another hour while cars passed and a woman jogged by. Life didn't pause just because mine had been completely detonated. Kevin came out with 2 cups of coffee and handed me one without saying a word. He didn't press for details, didn't ask what had happened. He just nodded when I managed to say, she admitted it. That was all I could manage to get out, and that was enough for him. I didn't go to work that day. I couldn't bring myself to pretend everything was normal. Instead, I stared at the wall of his guest room, scrolling through the screenshots again and again, trying to understand what had happened to us. I tried to find the exact moment where she had slipped away from me, wondering how many smiles had been fake, how many dinners had been lies, how long she had been splitting herself between the man who paid the bills and the one who gave her thrills. By 4:30 p.m. that same day, Jessica texted me again. You got what you wanted, you left. I'm not stopping you, but don't expect me to sit here and let you turn this into some sob story. She really didn't get it at all. She thought this was just about me leaving, about me being dramatic. No, this was about being completely done with her, about seeing someone's soul laid bare and realizing it was rotten to the core. I blocked her number that same evening. I started making a mental list of all the things I needed to collect, not from the apartment, because I couldn't bring myself to go back there yet, but all the important documents and belongings that were legally mine. The car title, the insurance documents, my birth certificate, my laptop, my external hard drives. I called my friend Diana, who worked in property law, and asked her about lease names on contracts and how to handle shared assets. She paused after I explained the basics of my situation and asked gently, Tyler, are you safe? It was a strange question that caught me off guard, but the truth was that I wasn't safe. Not from Jessica's fists. She had never laid a hand on me, but from her psychological games. What she had done was a kind of violence, surgical and deliberate. The kind that unravels your sense of self until you start apologizing for being lied to. That night, I sat in Kevin's living room and drafted a letter. Not to Jessica, but to myself. I wrote down everything I could remember. Every time I had ignored my gut instinct. Every time she had made me doubt my own sanity. Every time I had blamed myself for the way she treated me. It filled 4 pages of notebook paper. At the bottom, I wrote, You saw this happening. You just didn't want to believe that someone you loved could be so hollow. Then I folded it up and slid it into my bag, a scar in paper form that I could carry with me. I didn't sleep that night, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't pretend to be okay either. And somehow that felt like progress. The next morning, I woke up in the guest room with sunlight cutting sharp across the bed. I hadn't really slept. It was more like dozing in and out of these awful loops, dreams where Jessica was laughing in my face or whispering Brandon's name in our old kitchen. But when I opened my eyes, something fundamental had shifted inside me. It wasn't peace, and it wasn't even clarity, but the fog had lifted enough for one thing to cut through clearly. I wanted my life back. Not the life with her in it, but the one I'd had before I started shrinking myself to keep her comfortable. I spent that day making important phone calls. One to a divorce attorney that Diana had recommended. One to my boss asking for a week off to handle personal matters. I went to my bank to freeze our joint accounts until I could properly split them. Jessica hadn't taken me seriously yet, but she would soon enough. She'd see the line I was drawing in the sand and know it wasn't written in chalk. Around noon, Kevin came into the guest room with a box of my belongings from storage, stuff I hadn't looked at in years. He set it down quietly, gave me a look that said, "You're doing the right thing," and left me alone with it. I opened the box and found a photo strip from our first year of dating. Jessica was wearing that ridiculous oversized sweater, and I was holding a churro. We were both laughing like complete idiots, caught up in the moment. I didn't cry when I saw it. Instead, I tore the strip in half and dropped it back into the box. Not out of hate, but out of necessity. That version of us didn't exist anymore. Maybe it never really had. Then I did something much harder. I went back to the apartment. Jessica wasn't home, thankfully. The key still worked, and the place smelled exactly like her. A mix of vanilla candles and that citrus shampoo she'd switched to around the time she met Brandon. I walked through each room with a garbage bag, taking only what was legitimately mine. No keepsakes, no sentimental landmines that would explode in my face later. Just clothes, important documents, and my electronics. I moved through the space like I was defusing a bomb, careful and methodical. Then I found myself standing in our bedroom. The bed was made with the sheets ironed and hospital corners pulled tight. That was new. Jessica never made the bed like that. I looked at the pillow I used to sleep on every night, but I didn't touch it. Instead of touching the pillow, I walked over to Jessica's nightstand. I opened the top drawer, and I don't even know why I did it. Maybe I was looking for some kind of closure, or maybe I just needed one final punch to the gut to be absolutely sure about what I was doing. There was a small black velvet box inside the drawer. I opened it and found a silver bracelet with a tiny engraved plate that read J+B. Beneath the bracelet was a note card written in Brandon's handwriting. For the fire in your eyes and the poison in your smile. Can't wait till he's finally out of the way. I stood there holding that piece of evidence like it was radioactive material. There it was. Proof that she hadn't just cheated on me. She had been actively planning a future with him while sleeping in my bed every night, wearing the wedding ring I had given her. I didn't rage, and I didn't break anything in the apartment. I simply walked out, dropped the bracelet on the kitchen counter where she'd be sure to see it, and taped a note to the front door that read, "It's yours now. All of it." That evening, I sat alone in a cheap motel room with a flickering television for company and a half-empty bottle of water. I didn't call anyone, didn't message Jessica, didn't even check my phone. I just sat there letting the weight of the entire day settle into my bones. The next morning, Kevin found me staring blankly at the water-stained ceiling. "You going to be okay?" he asked quietly. I didn't answer at first, then finally managed to say, "I don't know." It was the most honest thing I'd said in months, but over the next few days, something strange started to happen. The anger and the sense of betrayal didn't burn as hot anymore. Instead, they turned cold and calculated. This wasn't about Jessica anymore. It was about me. Who was I if I let this destroy me completely? If I let her poison everything good I had left in my life? I decided to fight back, but not by trying to win her over or prove my worth to her. I was going to fight by winning myself back. I started going to therapy sessions. I got a gym membership and started working out regularly. I even dusted off my old guitar and tried to remember what it felt like to make something beautiful without lying to myself about what it was. Jessica texted me a few more times over the following days. Her messages were bitter, demanding, and manipulative, but I didn't respond to any of them. At one point, she sent me a message that read, "You think you're so strong. You're pathetic. You'll never find anyone better than me." That particular message stung more than I wanted to admit, but it didn't break me. Because I knew something she would never understand. I had already found something better. Better meant me, the guy who finally stood up, walked out, and refused to be someone's backup plan. Better meant choosing the truth even when it hurt like hell. Better meant freedom from her lies and manipulation. One night, about a week after I had left for good, I got a phone call from Jessica. I let it go to voicemail and listened to the message later. "Tyler, please, let's talk. I messed up, I'm sorry. Can we try again?" I listened to that voicemail once, then deleted it without a second thought. Sometimes there's no fixing what's been broken beyond repair. Sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is walk away and never look back. And I was finally ready to do exactly that. The days began to blur together after that, but in a good way. I kept my head down and worked through the emotional fog with small, steady steps. Therapy sessions twice a week, daily workouts at the gym, long drives where I rolled the windows down and just breathed in the fresh air. The first real sleep I'd had in months came not from exhaustion, but from a quiet sense that maybe, just maybe, I could find my way back to being myself again. Then came what felt like the hardest part of this entire process, telling people about what had happened. Friends, family members, even some co-workers who had known Jessica and me as a couple. Jessica was the person everyone thought I had it all figured out with. We were supposed to be the perfect couple who somehow made marriage look easy and effortless. But behind closed doors, I had been slowly unraveling for months. My best friend Stephanie listened to the whole story without blinking, without judging me, and without offering empty platitudes that wouldn't help anyone. She just sat there and let me unload the entire nightmare of late nights, lies, and betrayals. When I finished, she said simply, "You deserve so much better than that." But the most important realization was that this wasn't just about Jessica anymore. It was about me, about reclaiming every single piece of myself that she had tried to crush under the weight of her deception and cruelty. The divorce papers came through several weeks later, and Jessica fought tooth and nail every step of the way. She demanded half of our savings, argued about custody of our dog, and even tried to claim that I was the one at fault for the breakdown of our marriage. She spun her story like a seasoned professional, always painting herself as the victim, always playing the martyr who had been wronged. But I had my evidence ready. The phone backups, the photos, the messages between her and Brandon, everything Nathan had recovered for me. She was absolutely furious when I filed the papers and presented all the proof of her affair. She called me every name in the book, told me I would regret leaving her, and said she would make sure I never forgot who I really was. But this time, I didn't respond to any of her threats or manipulation tactics. I wasn't afraid of her anymore. The final court date was brutal and emotionally draining. Her lawyer tried to paint me as mentally unstable, someone who had invaded his client's privacy and couldn't handle the normal stresses of marriage. But the judge saw right through their strategy. The bracelet with J+B engraved on it, the messages mocking me, the note from Brandon saying he couldn't wait until I was out of the way. They all spoke louder than any lie Jessica could tell in that courtroom. When the judge finally signed the divorce decree, I felt something that was close to relief. But deeper than that, it was freedom, pure and simple. As I walked out of the courthouse that day, I didn't look back over my shoulder. I didn't want to see Jessica's face or hear whatever parting shot she might try to deliver. I was done with that chapter of my life. Jessica had been a chapter in my story, a dark and twisted chapter that had nearly destroyed me. But she wasn't the whole story. She wasn't the ending. And for the first time in years, I felt genuinely ready to write the next chapter of my life. Even after the divorce was completely finalized, the echoes of everything that had happened continued to linger in unexpected moments. Jessica's voice would haunt the quiet spaces. In the silence after a phone call, in the way a familiar song on the radio suddenly felt like an emotional trigger. But I was learning to live with those echoes instead of letting them control my thoughts and actions. I found genuine solace in establishing small, meaningful routines for myself. Early morning runs through the park near Kevin's house, cooking meals that I actually wanted to eat instead of just grabbing whatever was convenient, diving into books I'd ignored for years while I was consumed with trying to save my marriage. I even started volunteering at a local animal shelter, where I met people who didn't have hidden agendas or secrets, just simple, honest kindness. One evening, while driving home from therapy, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror and was struck by what I saw. The man looking back at me wasn't the broken, desperate guy from months ago who had sat crying in a parking lot outside a closed pet store. He was tired, sure, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. But there was something else too. A quiet strength, a patience that comes from having been through hell and choosing not to burn everything down in response. I started thinking about forgiveness during those long drives. Not forgiveness for Jessica. That wasn't something I owed her or even wanted to give, but forgiveness for myself. Not because I had to, but because I deserved to let go of the weight I'd been carrying. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, that crushing weight began to lift from my shoulders. Then one day, completely out of nowhere, a message popped up on my phone from an unknown number. "Hey Tyler, it's Brandon. Just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. You didn't deserve it." I stared at that message for a long time, reading it over and over again. Part of me wanted to respond, to tell him exactly what I thought of him and what he'd helped Jessica do to me. But I didn't reply. Some wounds don't need to be reopened, and some conversations aren't worth having. Instead, I deleted the message and blocked the number. My life wasn't about them anymore. It was about me, and I was finally ready to live it completely on my own terms. Months continued to pass, and the scars that Jessica had left on my heart and mind slowly began to fade. Not because time heals all wounds like people always say, but because I had made a conscious choice not to carry those scars around with me anymore. One chilly afternoon, I found myself standing in front of a small coffee shop downtown, waiting to meet Diana. She had become one of my biggest supports through this entire mess, transitioning from just being my lawyer to being a genuine friend. We talked about everything that day: life, loss, what comes after you rebuild yourself from scratch. I realized during our conversation that I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was actually living again, something I hadn't done in years. The man who had once sat alone in his car, completely shattered and betrayed, had somehow managed to rebuild himself from the ashes of a marriage that had gone catastrophically wrong. Through this entire painful process, I had learned some fundamental truths about relationships and about myself. I learned that love without respect isn't actually love at all. It's a trap that keeps you bound to someone who doesn't value you. I learned that sometimes people are cruel not because they hate you, but because they never really learned to love themselves properly. And perhaps most importantly, I learned that no one else's betrayal can define your worth as a person unless you allow it to happen. I also learned how to trust again, but not blindly like I had before. I learned to trust cautiously but genuinely, to open up to people while still protecting the parts of myself that were worth keeping safe. And maybe the most valuable lesson of all was understanding that leaving isn't always about giving up on something. Sometimes walking away is about choosing yourself when absolutely no one else will. Jessica's name still stings sometimes when I hear it or see it written somewhere, but it no longer has any real power over me or my decisions. I'm writing this because I want anyone out there who feels the way I did during those dark months to understand something crucial. You deserve truth in your relationships. You deserve respect from the people who claim to love you. And if someone dares you to leave, if they challenge you to walk away from them, take that dare seriously. Because sometimes walking away from a toxic situation is the bravest and most self-respecting thing you'll ever do in your life. Looking back now, I can see that leaving Jessica wasn't just about ending a bad marriage. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my self-worth, and my right to be treated with basic human decency. It was about refusing to accept crumbs of affection from someone who was giving their real love to someone else entirely. The journey from that night when I walked out of our apartment to where I am today hasn't been easy, but it's been worth every difficult step. I've learned to value myself again, to trust my instincts, and to never again accept treatment that makes me question my own sanity or worth. If you're reading this and recognizing yourself in my story, please know that you have the strength to choose yourself too. You deserve so much better than someone who treats your love like it's disposable. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and even for them is to walk away and let them figure out their own life without you in it.